Kathy had always been fascinated by fashion, but what she loved most was clothing that combined softness, comfort, and elegance. Since beginning her relationship with Trey, she had discovered that he shared more of her interests than she had expected. Both were in their early 20s, had recently finished college, and enjoyed spending their free time wandering through clothing shops, discovering new designs, and discussing changing fashion trends. Whenever Kathy planned a visit to one of her favorite boutiques, Trey was happy to come along. He wasn't simply tagging along for her sake, he genuinely enjoyed examining different fabrics, colors, patterns, and styles. Their casual shopping trips gradually became a regular part of their relationship, giving them another hobby they could enjoy together. Kathy eventually noticed that Trey was drawn to the same qualities she valued in clothing: softness, ease, and comfort. One evening, while the two were relaxing at home, she encouraged him to try a silky sleepwear set similar to the one she had on. Trey was uncertain at first, mostly because it was unfamiliar territory for him, but after some hesitation he decided to give it a chance. To his surprise, he immediately liked the smooth fabric and relaxed feel. That small experiment changed his perspective. He became more willing to explore different kinds of sleepwear and began to realize that clothing didn't necessarily need to fit traditional expectations. For Trey, the most important thing was simply whether something felt good and suited his personality. Kathy admired his growing confidence and appreciated that he was becoming comfortable making choices based on his own preferences. As the months went by, fashion became an even bigger part of their shared routine. They visited stores together, compared materials, discussed different cuts, and exchanged opinions about new designs. Trey gradually became less concerned with how particular garments were traditionally categorized and more interested in their quality, practicality, and comfort. During a warm summer afternoon, Kathy showed Trey a selection of lightweight camisoles made from breathable, soft fabrics. She explained that people often chose them because they were comfortable and practical in hot weather. Curious, Trey decided to try one himself. He soon discovered that he enjoyed how light and comfortable it felt, and wearing something different no longer seemed like a major decision. His approach to fashion had changed. Rather than judging clothing according to rigid labels, Trey began evaluating each item according to its material, craftsmanship, comfort, and whether he personally liked it. Kathy was happy to see him becoming more self-assured and expressing his individuality without constantly worrying about other people's opinions. Their friends and relatives occasionally noticed the changes in Trey's wardrobe. Most responded with curiosity and acceptance rather than negativity. His sister Kim was especially encouraging. She told him that he seemed noticeably happier and more relaxed lately, and as far as she was concerned, that was what mattered most. Later, during another shopping trip, Kathy and Trey stopped by a large lingerie boutique where their friend Tammy worked. While Kathy looked through the latest arrivals, Trey explored the store and examined the different fabrics and designs. Tammy noticed his genuine interest and joined the conversation, asking him what kinds of materials and styles he preferred. Before long, the three friends were chatting comfortably about fashion, personal taste, and the many ways people choose clothing for themselves. For Trey, the experience represented just how far he had come, from hesitating over unfamiliar styles to confidently choosing clothes simply because they felt right for him. Trey eventually admitted that some of the clothes he had tried simply felt better than he expected. The softness, construction, and comfort appealed to him, and Tammy and Kathy reminded him that there was no reason to reject something he liked merely because of old-fashioned ideas about who was supposed to wear it. Little by little, his attitude toward shopping changed. At first, he had simply accompanied Kathy because he enjoyed spending time with her. Now he found himself genuinely looking forward to their trips. He became interested in fabric quality, measurements, stitching, and how different garments were designed. What once might have made him nervous had become something he could enjoy without constantly wondering how other people might judge him. Eventually, Kathy understood that the real transformation had never been about clothes. It had been about trust and confidence. Trey was learning to make choices for himself, while Kathy was learning how meaningful it could be to give someone the freedom to discover their own identity. Their relationship became stronger because neither expected the other to conform to a particular image. One afternoon, as they headed toward the parking lot, Kathy noticed the edge of a strap beneath Trey's shirt. With a mischievous grin, she gave it a playful tug. "Apparently, we're coordinated today," she joked. Trey gave her an exaggerated eye roll, but a smile quickly appeared on his face. "Even so, the situation still felt unfamiliar. Not long ago, he couldn't have imagined wearing something that had traditionally been marketed toward women. Yet now he was crossing a busy mall surrounded by strangers and, strangely enough, he wasn't particularly bothered. During the drive home, Trey became lost in his thoughts. Was his appearance noticeably different? Would anyone recognize what he was wearing? Would people stare? The questions kept circling through his mind, followed by another one that seemed even more important. If this was supposed to make him so uncomfortable, why did he actually feel okay? When they got home, Trey went upstairs intending to change before going outside to mow the lawn. Kathy stopped him halfway there. You know, you don't have to change just because you're going outside. Trey laughed. That's easy for you to say. Still, after a moment of consideration, he decided to leave his outfit alone and went outside. The afternoon was uneventful until Kim arrived. Trey immediately expected his sister to notice what he was wearing. He prepared himself for questions or an awkward reaction, but Kim surprised him. She gave him a hug and launched straight into a conversation about work, family, and their plans for the weekend. She didn't make his clothes into an issue. That simple reaction did more for Trey's confidence than any speech could have. The tension he had been carrying slowly disappeared. That evening, Kim and Kathy talked in the living room about fashion and individuality while Trey listened nearby. Their conversation wasn't about convincing him to dress a certain way. Instead, both women emphasized that his choices belonged to him. If he liked something, he could wear it. If he didn't, he could leave it behind. The idea stayed with him. For so long, Trey had focused on what certain clothes were supposed to represent. Now he began considering a much simpler question: what did he actually enjoy? Over the following weeks, he experimented carefully. Some styles surprised him in a good way, while others immediately went back onto the rack. A few garments were wonderfully comfortable, others looked appealing but felt completely wrong once he wore them. Through trial and error, Trey discovered that he didn't have to force himself into one narrow category. There was room to choose. One weekend, Kathy organized another shopping trip with a few friends, including Paul. Paul was outgoing, cheerful, and completely at ease with his personal style. He didn't seem particularly interested in traditional fashion rules. If he liked something, he wore it. Trey couldn't help noticing the difference. For years, he had spent countless hours imagining what strangers might think of him. Paul seemed to have escaped that trap entirely. He dressed for himself rather than for an audience. As the group moved through the stores, Trey found himself noticing things he would once have passed without a second glance. Bold colors caught his attention. Unusual cuts seemed more interesting than strange. Styles that had previously felt off-limits suddenly looked worth investigating. At one point, Paul emerged from a fitting room wearing a formal outfit and immediately asked everyone what they thought. The group started offering opinions, making jokes, and suggesting small changes. There was no embarrassment involved, just friends enjoying fashion together. For Trey, something clicked. Maybe clothing didn't have to come with a list of rules. Maybe it could simply be another form of creativity. Later, Kathy handed him an outfit she thought might look good on him. "You don't have to wear it," she said. "But if you're curious, there's no harm in trying." Trey stared at it for several seconds. The decision was completely his. Eventually, curiosity won. Inside the fitting room, he changed and stood in front of the mirror. For a moment, he simply stared at his reflection. He looked unfamiliar, but not because he had somehow become another person. Instead, he was seeing a side of himself he had spent years refusing to explore. That realization affected him more than the clothes themselves. He wasn't becoming someone else. He was discovering that there were more sides to himself than he had previously allowed. When Trey returned to the group, everyone greeted him with warm smiles. Nobody acted as though he had crossed some invisible line. They were simply happy to see him looking comfortable. For the remainder of the afternoon, Trey felt unusually free. He wasn't calculating what strangers might think. He wasn't measuring himself against expectations. He was simply enjoying the experience and learning more about his own preferences. As the months passed, fashion became an ordinary part of his self-expression. Some days he chose conventional masculine clothing. Other days he preferred softer materials, different silhouettes, or more expressive styles. His wardrobe didn't need to fit a single definition. The important part was that the decision was his. Kathy stood beside him. Kim did too. His friends encouraged him as well. But the most important change had happened inside Trey himself. He had finally learned to give himself the same acceptance that others had offered him. What began as a few unusual clothing choices had turned into a much deeper lesson. Trey discovered that confidence wasn't about perfectly matching someone else's expectations. It came from understanding yourself, accepting your preferences, and having the courage to live honestly. In the end, that realization meant far more to him than anything hanging inside a closet ever could.